Nintendo Switch 2 has just released their Handheld Boost mode for system version 22, and this is something that I requested Nintendo take a look at when I made my video review of the product when the Switch 2 launched in June of last year. Many Switch 1 titles will see organic improvements to things like loading speeds, frame rates, and overall performance, but there are some limitations. First, docked and handheld resolutions will see no increases at all. What would be nice to see is for Nintendo to provide an option to force a docked mode profile for backward compatible titles, regardless if the Switch 2 was running in docked or in handheld mode. But this may not be attainable as docked mode uses more processing power and may cause concerns for battery life. I do think Nintendo should investigate this option if it's indeed possible. Now, thanks to Nintendo and System Firmware Release 22, Handheld Boost mode has been provided to alleviate some of these concerns. Now, Handheld Boost mode causes the performance of Nintendo Switch software while undocked, in other words playing in handheld mode, to run as if they were playing in TV or in docked mode. And this means that games that run at suboptimal resolutions like Bayonetta 3 in handheld mode can take full advantage of docked mode resolutions, which means we'll get a fidelity boost. Now, I ended up testing a bunch of different games, and the general consensus is this is a very, very great feature that Nintendo has provided. You can see here with the various games that I tested, you can see the difference in resolution. Now, in some instances, some of these games that I tried out, you kind of have to squint a little bit or, really kind of focus on the visuals to understand that it has seen a resolution boost. Now, of course, because you can't capture handheld mode footage on a retail Nintendo Switch 2, it means that we have to resort to something like a good camera. So I'm using my 4K camera here at 60 frames per second, and I'm using a pretty high bit rate as well. So you can definitely see the differences here when I switch between the various games and going back and forth from handheld boost mode just to the regular mode. Now, the great thing about the handheld boost mode is that it's tucked away in the system settings and it can be toggled on the fly. So you can be playing your Switch 1 title in handheld mode on your Switch 2, and you can easily just go into the system settings and flick that toggle, and you'll see that immediate improvement in fidelity. And Bayonetta 3 for me is probably the one that really popped the most, because once again, we're playing this game in handheld mode on Switch 2, 480p. It looks decent enough, but you can definitely kind of sense that low resolution blurriness of the game. But we can go in now and flick the handheld boost mode option on, and you can see here that it looks so much cleaner now. It's almost a night and day difference in terms of fidelity. And the great part about Bayonetta 3 is that it doesn't drop its frame rates. It still runs at 60 frames per second, at least in the parts that I've been playing through. Another game that really kind of impressed me was Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. On the Nintendo Switch 1 in handheld mode, I believe it ran at sub 720p resolution. I think it was like 614p or something like that according to Digital Foundry. But it takes advantage of handheld resolutions with the handheld boost mode enabled, and it runs at a solid 1080p, and this can definitely make a difference to the visuals. Another game that I tested was Metroid Prime Remastered. Again, this is a game that kind of ran at just a little bit under 720p with some type of temporal AA filtering. Flicking it over to handheld boost mode, you can see the difference here almost immediately. You can see that the jagged edges of the geometry is a lot less apparent with the boost mode enabled. So really good stuff here by Nintendo. But let's kind of do some more testing with some other games that I tried out. Another game that I tested was Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Again, this is a game in handheld mode that runs at pretty low resolutions, but it does get cleaned up quite well when we turn the handheld boost mode on. Of course, I think most people would probably want to see a 60 FPS patch, a Switch 2, native patch for this game at some point, but this is pretty good for the time being, and I think it's going to make a lot of people happy, playing a game like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 on Switch 2, and there's a lot of Xenoblade fans out there for sure. So when this works, handheld boost mode really provides a excellent quality of life feature that really kind of breathes new life into your Switch 1 titles. But it's not all perfect, and I want to be very clear that there's a couple of things that I do want to bring to light. Now, the first thing is battery life. Now, there have been reports that turning on handheld boost mode significantly reduces your battery life by, an hour and a half to 2 hours. And there's been some reports out there of people doing, tests, basically just leaving their Switch 2 running, playing games for, up to 3.5, 4, 5 hours, and doing some, measurements on the amount of time. Well, I haven't done anything as scientific as that, but here's what I will tell you. When I started working on this video, it took about 3.5 hours for my Switch 2 to drain from fully charged to completely dead. And this was me testing various Switch 1 titles using handheld boost mode. So what I would do is I would play for, maybe 30 minutes or so, and then flick to the next game, and then flick to the next game, all by just swapping games in and out, testing the handheld boost mode with the Switch 2 running pretty much constantly that whole time. Now, I did not turn my airplane mode on, or I didn't adjust the brightness. I just had auto brightness turned on. But in my experience, I'm getting about 3 to 3.5 hours, and that is definitely a lot lower than what I would normally be getting if I was just playing back compat Switch 1 titles on Switch 2 exclusively, which would probably be closer to 4.5 to 5 hours. So there's definitely a reduction in terms of battery life, and my kind of readings are at least in line with people out there and their readings that they've been kind of talking about online as well. So battery life is definitely a factor when it comes to handheld boost mode on Switch 1 titles. And Nintendo does kind of call this out in their description here on the system settings page. Now, the other side effect of handheld boost mode that I think hasn't been illustrated and talked about as much is that there are some titles, and this is something that I think the community is going to uncover as we go along, but there are some titles out there that see significant degradation in performance. And what I mean by that is some games that kind of run at 60 frames per second in handheld boost mode kind of dip down below 60, and in some instances around 30 frames per second. So we're kind of going back to running Switch 1 titles on a docked Switch 1, if you will. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look at a couple of examples. The first one is Ni no Kuni 2, which is a game that does run at 60 frames per second on a Nintendo Switch 2 in handheld mode. And as you can see, we're running the game silky smooth, 60 frames per second, it's not missing a beat. Now, before I give you my take on this particular aspect, I do want to be very clear that there is no way for me to measure frame rates and do direct feed captures of these games running in handheld mode, but I am someone that is very sensitive to frame rates. I can definitely tell if a game is dropping its frames, and you'll be able to tell as well, because some of these games definitely dip their frame rates quite significantly, and I'll kind of keep to the ones that are quite obvious. Now, Ni no Kuni 2 is a game that runs at 60 FPS via back compat mode on Switch 2 in both TV mode and in handheld mode. Now, when I turned on boost mode for Ni no Kuni 2, you can see very easily that if we go to the overworld area and just move the camera around and move our characters around, you can see that drop in frame rate. It is as clear as day. I think it's kind of dropping as low as 30 frames per second here, and it's definitely quite jarring. Now, going back and turning handheld boost mode off and running around the outer world as well, you can definitely see the difference here. I'm not saying that Ni no Kuni 2 is locked at 60 frames per second without handheld mode turned on, but when it's switched on, it is much more apparent, and in some ways it's quite jarring. Now, for me personally, if I'm playing Ni no Kuni 2 on my Switch 2, I would much prefer to have handheld boost mode turned off. Another game that I tested that I noticed performance issues on with handheld mode boost enabled was Darksiders 3. Now, Darksiders 3 is a game that does run in back compat mode, and it does run at 60 frames per second. It's very, very good to play that game on Switch 2 in handheld mode, but turning on handheld mode boost, you can definitely see those performance drops. Again, I can't give you accurate measurements on what it actually is dropping to, but for me, it's as clear as day. There are definitely some games out there, and there are quite a few that other people have reported, games such as Resident Evil 5. I haven't been able to test that one personally, and there are quite a few others out there that definitely see performance reductions. At the end of the day, I think Nintendo offering a handheld mode boost option in their system menu in firmware 22 is excellent. It's something that I've asked for personally. I wanted to see it as soon as I reviewed the Switch 2 last year, as mentioned. So I'm very, very happy Nintendo has provided this feature. However, I think what I'd really like to see going forward, rather than have this being a system-wide setting, I would much prefer if it was at the game level. So what I mean by that is each game should have the option to toggle handheld mode boost on and off per game. I personally think that would be much preferred at the game level, because many games do benefit from handheld mode boost, but in some instances I feel like it takes away from the experience, and your mileage will definitely vary on that. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below, what you think about Handheld Mode Boost by Nintendo. Look, it's a great feature, and I'm very, very happy it exists. Nintendo is definitely listening, so, you know, definitely no complaints there, but I would definitely like to see some improvement when it comes to performance. There's probably some games that will just not be able to be optimized any further, but this is a good feature. I just wish Nintendo will continue to improve upon it, because there's definitely some really great things to see here. But we're going to leave it here for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and I will catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.